And we're going to be continuing in the Mark of the Beast, Volume 1. We left off on page 118. And if you remember what we were covering last week, one of the things that we covered last week was the heads of the beast, and how these heads represented the seven world ruling powers. Remember, the first being Egypt, the second Assyria, and the third was Babylon. And Babylon was the world ruling power that was in existence at the time that the prophet Daniel gave his prophecies. And he said at that time there would only be 4 world ruling powers remaining, and Babylon being the one. And then we saw how Medo-Persia came in, the Greek Empire came in, and then we see the 6th world ruling empire. There was the Roman Empire, and Pastor shows that this world ruling empire was military Rome, how he shows that this was actually military Rome. And the 7 heads, remember, these 7 hills represented the 7 heads, or 7 world ruling powers, and the last world ruling power being the one that is attempting to come into existence today, which is Papal Rome. And you know, it's interesting that you can see, I think, when we think of prophecies, a lot of times we think of something that is just not a prophecy that has not come to pass, then it has come to pass. It's just instantaneous. But you can see this Papal Rome attempting to come into existence today. If you go back and you take a look at what took place with this agreement that took place in Paris here recently with the climate change, you know, you can see how the nations, you know, were lending their authority, you know, to this beast, you know, being in agreement with this beast. But we still see that there are those who do not want to have anything to do with what this beast has to offer. And then you can see, as the prophecies do show, that this beast will make war with all forms of righteousness, any and all forms of righteousness, and this is what we see. In the book, The Keys of This Blood by Malachi Martin, you know, that actually showed those regions and those nations that would have these wars raged against them because they would not bow their knee to Mother Mary. And then, winding up toward the end of class last week, we were looking at this kingdom divided, and it shows how Rome was the eternal city, and how it says traditionally founded by Romulus and Remus. You know, of course, you know that story about these 2 orphans that were raised by a wolf. You know, and that is somehow how Rome was actually formed. But it shows here, it shows how that Rome was invaded by barbarians and natural disasters for hundreds of years, and then the decline of the empire. And in the 1500s, it came under the domination of the papacy. And it says Rome remained almost interruptedly under papal control until 1870. And then the Vatican, one of the outstanding architectural beauties of the city, it says, as well as the seat of the Roman Catholic Church, is an enclave of Rome under sovereign authority of the reigning pontiff. And Pastor, he reviews this whole thing here, and he says, to review, there were seven world ruling powers. Egypt and Assyria had risen and fallen by the time of Daniel. Babylon was in power at the time of Daniel's prophecy. And then Medo-Persia, Greek, and military Rome and Papal Rome were yet to rise. Now, Daniel said that this 4th kingdom, the Roman, would break into pieces and would subdue all things. And by subduing all things, it is the world power that Yachanan saw. And it's the same Roman kingdom that Daniel saw. And it showed here, it says, and it shows here that this head's deadly wound began to heal by the reinstating of the Pope's power. And it shows here that the Pope's authority in other kingdoms is merely spiritual, but in Italy he is temporal sovereign. And temporal sovereign, that word temporal means of or relating to time as opposed to eternity. Let's see here, see if I can get that to work. Okay, so temporal. It says, of or relating to time as opposed to eternity, or relating to earthly life. Secular, as opposed to clerical or sacred. Another word for it that they use is civil. It says, of or relating to, of or relating to time as distinguished from space, or of relating to the sequence of time or a particular time or space. But it's actually referring to lay or secular. In other words, it has to do with the governmental systems. It has to do like with the civil authorities, with civil law, with the governmental law, not spiritual, but governmental. So you see here, it's actually a combination. You can actually kind of see a combination of church and state. You see that combination of church and state. And then that definition of sovereign, so he's a temporal sovereign. In other words, what that means is possessing or held to possess some supreme political power or sovereignty, an acknowledged leader, and it says an arbiter. And it's interesting about this word arbiter because that means a power or a person with the power to decide a dispute or to judge. A person or agency, it's an agency, whose judgment or opinion is considered authoritative, a person who is considered to be an authority on what is right or proper. That arbiter. Remember what the Pope said when he was asked about certain things, and what did he say? He said, "Who am I to judge?" Remember that? He said, "Who am I to judge who am I to judge this, or who am I to judge that?" Well, that's exactly the seat that he holds. That's exactly the seat that he holds there. But on page 118 here, 7 kingdoms, 1 paganistic religion. And it shows here, it says, as there were to be seven world-ruling powers, they would all have the same paganistic religion. This religion was started by Nimrod and has continued to the present Roman Catholic Church and her daughters. And then we can see here the ceremonies of the Roman Catholic Church for further proof. So this is the Biblical and Theological Dictionary. And it shows here, it says, the ceremonies of this church are numerous and splendid. They're numerous and splendid. It says they make the sign of the cross in all their sacraments to give us to understand that they have their whole force and efficacy from the cross. Their whole force and efficacy. Well, remember what that cross is. That cross is what? An upside down what? An upside down sword. That's what it represents, right? Well, and they acknowledge this here. They say that they give their understanding that they have their whole force and efficacy. So their force, if you remember how the Crusades were carried out by force. And look at the definition of efficacy there. The power to produce a desired result or effect. This is what the Crusades did. They went out. The Crusades, they went out trying to force people to convert over to this universal religion. So, they make the use of the sign of the cross to understand that they have their whole force and efficacy from the cross. That's where they got their power, the power through peace and war. That's what they've got. Then it talks about the sprinkling of the holy water, and it talks about how they always bow at the name of Jesus. They keep lamps and wax candles continually burning before the shrines and images of the saints. And remember what the saints were. Remember what took place in 325 CE with the Council of Nicaea. Remember what Constantine did. Constantine united the whole region. He united everybody under the umbrella of the universal church. And he allowed them to bring in all manner of worship from their gods. And it didn't matter what they did and what the traditions were, as long as they paid the proper respect to the God of Rome. And this is where the saints come from. It was Babylon Mystery Religion. I think it was. Babylon Mystery Religion by Ralph Woodson actually shows, they have a list, and we've looked at that before, but they have a list of saints, of so-called saints that were nothing more than gods for each and every one of these purposes that they had. And they changed the name of the god and put saint in front of it to so-called Christianize it, to make it appear more acceptable. They show the practice of washing the poor's feet. They said the Church of Rome also professes to keep the fast of Lent with great strictness, and observes a much greater number of both feasts and festivals than the Church of England. So they say that they observe a great number of feasts and festivals. But remember what they did. Remember what the church did. They changed the laws. They changed the laws and the ordinances. They broke the everlasting covenant, and they changed the times and the festivals. Remember that? Remember in Daniel it shows that that's exactly what they did. Well, they show here one of the things that they mentioned about this fast of Lent. And anybody know what Lent is, where it comes from, and what it represents? Well, Lent's ancient roots come from the Anglo-Saxon Lencenton, meaning spring. And it shows here, it says Lent originated in the ancient Babylonian mystery religion. So it originated all the way back with the Babylonian mystery religion, the same institution that Nimrod set up. And it shows the 40 days abstinence of Lent was directly borrowed from the worshippers of the Babylonian goddess. Among the pagans, this Lent seems to have been an indispensable preliminary to the great annual feast and commemoration of the death and resurrection of Tammuz. Okay, so remember, this is in preparation of the worship of the goddess Easter. Okay, and this precedes Easter. And it says to conciliate the pagans to nominal Christianity, it shows here, it says Rome, pursuing its usual policy, took measures to get the Christian and pagan festivals amalgamated, in other words, combined, melted together, combined together, and by a complicated but skillful adjustment of the calendar, it was found no difficult matter in general to get paganism and Christianity to get these things mixed together. It says, now for our sunken idolatry, and this is also as many other things as to shake hands here, is what this shows. And it does show that this was part of the reason for the Council of Nicaea in 325 AY. So this preparation for Easter, this Lent, is supposed to be a time of self-examination, of doing without. But boy, they have one heck of a party right just prior to Lent, don't they? Mardi Gras. New Orleans is famous for that one. And I think Rio de Janeiro is also. They have the carnival down there, but they also have Mardi Gras in New Orleans is where they celebrate that. And it says, before giving up personal sins and vices during Lent, the pagans held a wild anything-goes celebration to make sure they got in their share of debaucheries and perversities, what the world celebrates as Mardi Gras today. In other words, they go to get it all out of their system so then they can concentrate on whatever it is they're going to concentrate on. Okay, but this is where Lent comes from, and people, they don't understand the origins of where that came from. But it shows here, it says, remember Daniel 7:25, we read the following, and think to change the festivals and laws, and they will be given into his hand. And we read here, it says, the Church of Rome assumes the title of Catholic or Universal as answering to the article in the Apostles' Creed, I believe in the Holy Catholic Church. And if anybody's ever been to a Catholic church, I kind of grew up going through that, but this Apostles' Creed was something that was recited every week. Every week it was recited, and it was, it wasn't something that was done with joy, for sure, but it was so monotone. It was almost like, okay, we just got to do this again. Okay, we did this. We do it every week, over and over and over and over. And it shows, but the reason for that is let me see here, because pastor shows it here. He says the above is perhaps sufficient account of the Roman Catholic faith, but as the creed of Pope Pius IV is universally admitted to as being the true standard of that faith, it would be decidedly wrong to conclude without inserting it. It says it contains succinct and explicit summary of the canons of the Council of Trent, and it was published in the form of a papal bull in 1564, and he adds, it is received throughout the whole Roman Catholic Church. Everyone who is admitted into that church publicly reads and professes his assent to it. Okay, in other words, it's read publicly, and and people they profess their assent to it, and this word assent simply means an agreement. Okay, they agree to it. And that's what the word assent means. It's assent. And it simply means that they agree to what is said in there. And then the, let me see, it was in the, let's see. Then it talks about here, and I think it was still talking about the Council of Trent here, but it talks about these further articles. There's 12 in this Apostles' Creed, but then it goes on and it continues, and it says, I firmly admit and embrace the apostolical and ecclesiastical traditions and all other constitutions and observances of the same church. I also admit the sacred scriptures. Now listen to what they're agreeing to. It says, I also admit the sacred scriptures according to the sense which the Holy Mother Church has held and does hold, to whom it belongs to judge of the true sense and interpretation of the Holy Scriptures, nor will I ever take and interpret them otherwise than according to the unanimous consent of the fathers. So they're saying that they would never, that they're not going to stand against or go against any teaching or any interpretation of the scriptures there. It shows here, it says, let me go down here, down the page here a little bit. It says, I profess likewise that the most holy sacrament of the Eucharist, there is truly, really, and substantially the body and blood, together with the soul and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. And there is made a conversion of the whole substance of the bread into the body and the whole substance of the wine into the blood, which conversion the Catholic Church calls transubstantiation. And what this is a little ceremony that's done every Sunday, and there is a prayer that's said over this little wafer that you've heard Pastor talk about this wafer before. It's a little round wafer. It's got a cross in it, and there is a prayer that's said over that, and supposedly, somehow, magically, it is transformed into the actual flesh of their God, Jesus Christ. Okay? It's no longer bread. It's actual flesh, is what they are saying. And they're actually saying that when they pray over this wine and they do their little ceremony with this wine, that it actually becomes the blood of their God. So what in reality they are partaking of in that ceremony is really none other than cannibalism, because they're eating flesh and drinking the blood. But in their minds, in what they're professing here, they're saying that this is exactly what they're doing. That they're actually transforming these things. That's not what Yahshua said. When Yahshua instituted that memorial, what did he say? This represents my body. That's what this does. This represents my body. This represents my blood. It's a representation. Yahweh's way, it's a representation, but the Catholic Church has turned it into actually, they say they actually turn it into actual flesh and blood. And then one of the other things they hold to is the doctrine of purgatory. It says, I constantly hold that there is a purgatory and that the souls that are detained therein are helped by the suffrages of the faithful. Then they say, I most firmly assert that the images of Christ and the mother of Christ, ever a virgin, Okay, so they're saying that this goddess is ever a virgin, even though she had many children, she continues to be a virgin. That this mother of Christ and also of the other saints are to be had and retained, and that their due honor and veneration be given to them. I acknowledge that the Holy Catholic Church and the Apostolic Roman Church, the mother and mistress of all churches. They use that word mistress. What comes to your mind when you hear mistress? You think about an adulteress, right? Well, that is one of the definitions of that word mistress. A woman other than a man's wife, other than his wife, whom a married man has a continuing sexual relationship with. That is one thing, and you've got to remember that the prophecies show that this Babylon mystery the Great, this mother of harlots, commits fornication, and she does. She commits this God worship, and the people commit God worship with her. They forsake the law of Yahweh in order to follow her. Now, the definition of mistress here is a woman who has power and authority or ownership. It says a woman who employs or supervises servants. And that definitely fits the Roman Church. She does employ and supervises her servants. A woman who is in charge of school or other establishments, the institutes of higher learning. They're all run. They're run under the direction of the Catholic Church. And then look at number 3 there. It says something personified as a female that rules, directs, or dominates. And then look at the example there. When Rome was the mistress of the world. Okay, and this actually comes out of Webster's dictionary, Webster's online dictionary, and it shows there that when Rome was the mistress of the world, well, actually it is. Rome continues to be that mistress of the world. So going back to that, it says, I acknowledge the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Roman Church and the mother and mistress of all churches. The mother of the harlots is exactly what she is. And I promise and swear true obedience to the Bishop of Rome, that's none other than the Pope himself, the successor of St. Peter, Prince of the Apostles, and the Vicar of Christ, it shows here. And it says, this true Catholic faith, out of which none can be saved, which I now freely profess and truly hold, then I, they state their name, promise, vow, swear, and most constantly to hold and profess the same, whole and entire. But you see this. You see what they're vowing here and what they're upholding. And it's really interesting to notice when I was reading up on this on the Apostles' Creed. There was never anything that the apostles came up with. And they admit that. They actually admit, it's actually admitted in the writings that, well, the apostles never professed this. They never said anything like this. This came up years and years and years after their death. So it's very, very misleading. It's very misleading. It's part of that deception that goes out into this world. It says, such is the avowed and accredited faith of the Church of Rome. But it seems a most extraordinary circumstance that while this church has so enlarged the creed that it has reduced the number of the commandments. Now, listen to what they're saying here. It reduced the number of commandments, omitting altogether the second, you shall not make unto thee any graven images. So the Catholic Church, they did away with that one. They took it out. It is no longer a commandment. And then it says, Exodus 20:3-6, as if the Catholics were conscious, it would by no means be reconciled with the 21st article of the above recited creed, which that 21st article is, I most firmly assert that the images of Christ and the mother of Christ, ever a virgin, and also the other saints are to be had and retained, and that honor and veneration are to be given to them. So you see, they ran into a problem. They ran into a problem with the scriptures and with what they were pushing, what they pushed forth, what they were presenting. So what did they do? Well, they just took the commandment out. They changed the law, just like the scripture shows that they would, just like it was prophesied that they would do. They took it out. And then to prevent alarm, oh no, now we've only got 9. How do we resolve this? And then to prevent alarm, as everybody must know there should be 10 commandments, the last one is divided into 2 to make up the number. So the one that talks about you shall not covet or lust after your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, they divided that one, they split that one into 2, talking about, okay, you shall not lust after your neighbor's wife, and then they talk about the property. So they split that one out into 2, and now they can count them up, okay, now we've got 10. And then actually over here on page 121, about halfway down on the page, you can see they've got the 10 their 10 commandments listed there. And number 9 says, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. And then 10, you shall not covet your neighbor's goods, here it says. So you can see there again how they twist the scriptures, as the prophecy show, as the apostles show. They show that they actually twist the scriptures to their own destruction. But this beast, on the bottom of page 121, this beast has 7 heads. It says, as we have seen, the 7 heads are 7 mountains ruling over the 7 world powers that mystery Babylon ruled over. We then went on to explain what the 7 world powers were. The apostle Yachanan, or John, said in Revelation 13:1, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having these 7 heads. Now, Yachanan's interpretation of these heads were inspired by Yahweh, are found in Revelation 17:9. And here's the mind which has wisdom. Here is the mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which this woman sits. And you've got to remember, let the scriptures interpret the scriptures. What is it? How does somebody have wisdom? What does Proverbs say wisdom is? What is the beginning, the first part, the chief part of wisdom? And praise Yahweh. It's the reverence of Yahweh is the beginning. It's the chief part. That's the beginning of wisdom. And the why, Daniel showed, he says, none of the wicked are going to understand these things. They're going to have their own interpretations. They're going to pull their own interpretations out. But none of the wicked are going to understand these things. But the wise, those who reverence Yahweh, those are going to be the ones that have this wisdom. They're going to be able to understand these things. And we thankfully, praise Yahweh, we have a teacher who is here and who teaches us these things so that we don't fall into the same deception that's out in this world. But what are these 7 mountains? An excerpt is copied from the Basic Everyday Encyclopedia on page 451 here. And we see that these Rome, the Basic Everyday Encyclopedia, Rome explains Rome is built on 7 hills or 7 mountains. And it says, Rome, the eternal city. It says, it lies on, is on both sides of the Tiber River, traditionally founded in 753 BY by Romulus and Remus, is built on 7 hills. And then he goes to name these hills. And these hills, remember, they're each named after a god. You see the Palatine, Capitoline, Quirinal, Esquiline, Viminal, Caline, and Vatican, it says here. It says this woman, or whore. It shows, Pastor writes here, he says, prophetically, John saw a woman sitting in control of the beast because she sat upon the beast. So the person that's sitting on top of this beast is actually in control of this beast. Much as a person who rides a horse is somewhat in control of the horse. But this woman sat on this beast. In Revelation 17, 1-6, and it says here in verse 1, it says, there came one of the 7 Malachim, which had the 7 vials, talk with me, saying, come, and I will show you the judgment of this great whore that sits upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. They committed idolatry with her. They've forsaken Yahweh, and they've wandered after her. And the inhabitants of the earth, and they've been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Remember, Pastor, he talked about this, and talking about this being made drunk with the wine of her fornication also means becoming confused, because drunkenness means confusion, with the teaching and the wine of this fornication, which is God worship. So confusion comes about through the teaching of this God worship, and through the submission to God worship, it causes nothing but confusion. Just as physical fornication eventually does lead to this, it does lead to confusion of the mind because of the diseases and things like that are contracted through that. So he carried me away in the spirit in the wilderness, and I saw a woman set upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And this woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand. It shows, the splendor, the splendor of this woman. And remember what they talked about, the ceremonies of the church over here on page 118. Remember, it says the ceremonies of the church are numerous and they're splendid. You can see the splendor, and then you see here the description how she is arrayed in this purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, and has this golden cup in her hand, and on the outside, much like a whitewashed sepulchre, appears very desirable and appears oh so beautiful on the outside. But what's on the inside of that whitewashed sepulchre? What's it full of? Dead men's bones, death, rot. It's a tomb. It's a grave. The same way, the exact same thing that comes forth from the teachings of the religions of this world. The teachings that come forth from the religions of this world, they fight against the laws of Yahweh. They fight against the laws of peace. They teach war. And as a result, that's all they're full of. They're full of death and misery and destruction and sorrow. They're full of all of these things. We can see them out in the world. You look at the, you can see the confusion of the mind in the world. You can see it, and it's becoming more and more evident. And it's actually, it's not difficult to see anymore at all. But it shows here, it says, but this woman, even though she had all of this, she had this golden cup in her hand, but it was full of the abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And then upon her forehead was the name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots and the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Yeshua. And when I saw this, I wondered with great astonishment. And Yochanan, or John's interpretation, was inspired by Yahweh. It's found in Revelation 17:18, and it shows here, and this woman, which you saw, is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. That great city which sits on 7 hills, it does reign over the kings of the earth. The nations, the leaders of the nations, you'll see it on the news how this leader goes and confers with the Pope, and this one goes and confers and they come back. They have their council and they come back. You see this constantly. You see it all the time. Now in chapter 9 here on page 123, it talks about this likeness of the beast, or second Babylon. This likeness. In chapter 8, started the discourse about the city that Yochanan saw in his vision. Yochanan was shown a prophecy for the last days, and it is a prophecy that will involve the whole world. But this vision Yochanan saw was a certain city described as Mystery Babylon the Great. It says in the likeness of the beast, or the second Babylon. In Revelation 18:2-4, it says, and he cried with a mighty strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen once, and is fallen the second time, and has become the habitation of demons, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, that you do not partake in her sins, and that you do not receive of her plagues. And Pastor, he continues to show here, he says, Yochanan described this city as a city and as a harlot. So again, Revelation 17:1, 5, and 18. It says, and there came one of the 7 Malachim, which had the 7 vials. And he talked with me, saying, come, and I will show you the judgment of the great whore that sits on many waters. And upon her forehead, again, was written this name, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots and the abominations of the earth. And the woman which he saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. And then Revelation 18:10, it says, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, the great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is your judgment come. In 1 hour is your judgment come. And Pastor Abelin, I love the way he goes through this. He walks us through step by step by step here. But he shows here, he says, many students of prophecy have confused the city that Yochanan saw with the first original Babylon. This original city of Babylon was captured by the Persians under Cyrus the Great in 539 BY. Later, Alexander the Great planned to make the original city of Babylon the capital of this Eastern Empire, but after his death, the original city Babylon gradually lost its importance. The original city Babylon is not the city that Yochanan saw. It's not that city. And it says the Newfoundland Wagnalls Encyclopedia shows here, it says, although the Persian kings made Babylon their residence, nothing was done for the restoration of the city. Alexander the Great, on his entrance in 331 BY, had promised the inhabitants he would rebuild the ruined temple. He was unable even to clear away the rubbish, although he employed 10,000 workmen for 2 months. After his death, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar and the founding of Seleucus, Babylon went rapidly into decay. So, although he attempted to rebuild this Babylon, he was never able to do it. The Encyclopedia Britannica shows here the foundation of the Seleucus in 312 BY diverted the population of Babylon into the new capital of Babylonia, and the ruins of the old city became a quarry for the builders of the new seat of government. So it shows here that that city fell that one time, and it was never rebuilt. It fell into complete ruin. It says literal Babylon was no longer a great city when Revelation was written at the end of the 1st century AY. So when Yochanan was shown this vision, that Babylon, that city, Babylon, was in ruins. It was in ruins. It had already fallen. It didn't rise and fall again. But it had fallen that one time. So the prophet Daniel prophesied the fall of the original city of Babylon. And it shows that here in the 3rd year of the reign of Joachim, king of Yada, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And then we'll jump over here, Revelation, and Daniel chapter 5, 17 to 31. We see here that let me see here. We see here a prophecy that was given in verse 25, and this was the part of the hand that was sent from him, and this writing was written, and this is the writing that was written, many takal of Sarin. And this interpretation of the thing is many. Yahweh has numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Remember, there were too many. Yahweh will do this a second time at the end of the age. So here it shows it was done once, and then it was going to be done again. This tikal, thou art weighted, and the balances are found wanting, and Peres, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and to the Persians. And so Yahweh's prophecy here, Yahweh's prophecy given to Daniel, was fulfilled exactly as Yahweh said. Babylon was given to the Medes and the Persians. Remember, Babylon, you had that world-ruling kingdom, Babylon, at the time of Daniel, it fell and was given to the Medes and the Persians, just as Daniel showed that it would be. Babylon was given to the Medes and the Persians. Since Babylon had already fallen and had never been rebuilt, it could not possibly be the same city that Yochanan or John saw in his vision for the last days. It couldn't be. Cities are often referred to in a spiritual sense, bearing similarities to the original. And this is, remember, the title of this chapter is the likeness of the beast, or the second Babylon. And this is the definition here of this word likeness. It means a copy, a portrait. It means, again, the appearance or semblance. And this is what this is what he's showing us here. This is what he's showing us here, that there would be a second city that would arise, and it would be in this likeness, which is in the appearance or semblance. It would be the quality or state of being like it. It would resemble that. It says, after John gives a full description here on page 126, it says, after John gives a full description of the first Babylon in Revelation 17, 1 through 6, he then gives a full description of the second Babylon in Revelation 18. To identify the second Babylon, please follow the clues given to John in Revelation 18. John shows us a city like no other city on the earth. In Revelation 18:1, John says, after these things, meaning after he saw the first Babylon. So after he saw the first Babylon, he goes on to the second. In Revelation 18:2, we see Babylon falls twice. As the first Babylon was led by Satan's demons, so also the second Babylon is become the habitation of demon worship. Revelation 18:2, again he shows, and he cried with a strong voice, saying, Babylon is fallen, and is become the habitation of demons, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Now, this pastor shows here at the bottom of page 126 here, look at this. He says, every unclean and hateful bird means to raise up sin. To raise up sin. Well, what is being done in this second Babylon? What is being done there? Sin is not being done away with, but it's being promoted. It's being raised up. It says, means to raise up sin, which is against the laws of Yahweh. Compare this definition to Revelation 18:5. For her sins have reached into heaven, and Yahweh has remembered her iniquities. Remember, iniquities means the pushing aside of the laws of Yahweh. Now, all nations, on page 127 here, it says all nations have Babylon's teachings. For all nations, Revelation 18:3, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich, have become rich through the abundance of her delicacies. So we can see here, again what is taking place with the second Babylon. It says the kings of the earth are practicing fornication. And that simply means, as Pastor shows, they're following after anything that is not the laws of Yahweh. All forms of God worship are considered fornication. And so anything that is not after the laws of Yahweh. In this city, the kings of the earth meet at the United Nations in Manhattan, New York, on land and in buildings donated by the powerful Rockefeller Foundation, he shows. In Revelation 18:9 through 11, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning. So you can see here that these people, that these kings, they're going to see her from afar off. They're standing from afar off for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is her judgment come. So again, now we see again this 1 hour, this very short time period when this judgment is going to come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise any longer. See, by these verses, we know here that the kings stand a very long way off when the city is destroyed, showing that they do not make this city their permanent dwelling place. They only meet there temporarily for trading purposes. So you can see there, because it talks about the merchants of the earth, right? So they meet there temporarily for trading purposes. Neither are they in the city when it is destroyed by fire, and exact description of destruction by nuclear war. Revelation 18 through 19, and they cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And they shall cast dust on their heads, and they cried weepingly and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. So again, you see this again, this destruction comes in 1 hour. And it shows here, Pastor shows here, he says, the merchants of the earth have become rich through this merchandising religion. This merchandising religion. And there is a lot of merchandising that comes forth from this religion that is in the world, from this Babylon mystery religion. Remember, each pagan religious holiday of this Babylonian system carries with it buying and selling of gifts. Okay? Buying and selling of gifts, of merchandise of one form or another. Selling of, the celebration of birthdays, the gift giving there. You see the gift giving even that takes place at Easter through their Easter baskets and these Easter eggs and these things that are left by this rabbit that lays eggs. You see the big one that comes about in December. The Christmas holiday season is a big gift giving season. Valentine's Day, another one. Where all huge amounts of money are spent on gift giving. And Halloween is probably, I think we've read before, almost one of the most profitable holidays out there. It brings in more money than any other holiday. And who's getting what is the benefit of going out and buying these Halloween decorations? Is there any righteousness in that? What's the benefit? What benefit does going out spending $500 on decorations or whatever? What benefit does a person gain from that? Are they going to eat these decorations later? Is it going to provide them with some sort of knowledge? Is it going to provide them with anything that's going to be useful in the future? No. Because their decorations, they will break, they get lost, they get worn out, then they have to go out and be replaced. And guess what? Next year, they come out with new and improved models, bigger models. Those were so last season. We're going to buy new ones now. Okay, so they're going to go out and they're going to spend more money and more money and more money, and for what? There's nothing beneficial that comes out of these things. Now, the merchants become rich through these things. Most assuredly, the merchants become rich because of these gifts, making the merchants who deal in this merchandise rich. Since World War I, the businessmen of New York's Wall Street have been the most powerful in all the world. Since World War I. Now, World War I ran from roughly July, I think the dates I found were July 28th, 1914 to November 11th, 1918. I think are the dates that I saw where World War I ran. And it says, since that time, the businessmen of New York's Wall Street have been the most powerful in all of the world. Okay? You're getting into the time period known as the last days, when knowledge is increased. Okay, and you'll also begin to see the increase in this merchandising and the increase in the power from all of these things. Most of the major economic and financial decisions affecting the United States and most of the Allied world have originated from some skyscraper or at a boardroom meeting in Manhattan. Major corporations, many people have their headquarters in New York. That is the place to be. Says the description of the very existence of this power eliminates any city of the communist world, because and it shows businesses and commerce are not permitted to thrive in collective communist societies. And then it talks about here, Pastor shows here, he shows this great city that became three parts. This great city that became three parts. It says the great city of New York is split into three major parts. Staten Island is one part. Manhattan Island and the Bronx compose the second part, and Brooklyn and Queens compose the third part. To better understand which Babylon is meant here, we have the further description that John gives us in Revelation 16. And John here is speaking of the vials that the Malachim pour out on the earth in the last days. And he also shows two Babylons here. The first Babylon was located on the great river Euphrates. On this great river Euphrates. So we're going to see here, this map here kind of shows what John was talking about, what Yochanan was talking about here. And he says the region of the lower course the region of the lower course, Mesopotamia, was the birthplace of great civilizations, and has many ruins of Babylon, Separ, Larsa, Ur, and Erech. Babylon was strategically located on the Euphrates River. So right here, let me see which one's which. Up here, coming from Turkey, coming down through this way on the north, through Baghdad, you can see the Tigris River. And from Syria, coming in here, following right down through here, you see Babylon. Babylon is situated right on the Euphrates River. And then this area here, this area at one time was known as the Fertile Crescent, as also the land of Mesopotamia, which means the land between the two rivers. And then here you can kind of see the city of Babylon as it was shown, how it actually kind of sits on, you see the Euphrates River coming through, and how it actually kind of sat on both sides, on both sides of the river. So kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what John was talking about here when he was talking about this first Babylon that he saw. It said in Revelation 16 now, 12 through 14 shows the sixth vial, or the bowl, is poured out on this great river Euphrates, where the first Babylon was located. But Revelation 16, 17 through 21 is the seventh vial, and is poured out on a great city which is made up of three major parts. So here you see the area in and around the great river Euphrates where this first vial is poured out. But this next one, the seventh vial, is poured out on this great city which is made up of three parts. It says, by reading Revelation 16:9 in its original, we can see that John was giving us a description of this great city which has three major parts to its whole. And you can see down here in the underlined part here of the diglot there, and you can see it says, and was the city the great into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and Babylon the great, and mountains were not found. So you can kind of see that, because Pastor's going to be covering the rest of that about these mountains not being found. But on page 130 it says, notice the word divided is not in the original. It didn't show that it was divided into three parts. It shows that this great city was made up of three parts. What John said was the great city of three parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And in Revelation 16:20 says, and every island fled away. And the history, and when you actually look at the structure of New York City is actually a multi-island city. Let's see if I've got... right here, kind of give you an idea here of New York City here. This is just kind of an overview of what we see here on page 130. But it shows these three major parts here, the three major parts of the city here. You see Staten Island is this one here, and then you see Brooklyn and Queens. You see this area here is made up of that second part. And then you see Manhattan and the Bronx, you see up over here, that makes up that third part. So you can see there's the three parts of that city. And it says, let me see here. The reader must be aware not to confuse this three-part city with the city which is the seat of the beast in Revelation 17:9. The seat of the woman is built on 7 hills or 7 mountains, the city that reigns over the kings of the earth. This latter description fits none other than Rome, which sits on 7 hills, as proven in chapter 8. The city made up of 3 parts, New York City, is the second Babylon. It is part of the last beast which came up out of the earth in Revelation 13:11, and has two horns, or two religious powers. Remember, it talks about the Catholics and the Protestant, made up of those two horns. Again, the reader is advised to reread chapter 4 for this proof. So, Pastor, he's telling us to constantly go back and rehearse these things, okay, in order to keep them straight. But the Basic Everyday Encyclopedia gives us information on New York City. It says, as a cultural and educational center with great art galleries, musical organizations, museums, universities, schools, places of entertainment, shops, hotels, parks, botanical gardens, libraries, characteristic nationality sections, New York City is without parallel. Now, remember the city of Babylon. Remember the ancient city of Babylon. Remember when the people were taken captive and taken to Babylon, they were taken to where? They were taken and they were taught. Remember, Pastor brought out and he taught how they were taught in the institutes of higher learning. They were brought into there and they were taught that Babylonian culture. That Babylonian culture was made up of art. It was made up of music. It was made up of universities, the schools of higher learning. It was made up of entertainment. It was made up of all of these same things that we see here in New York. It says it is the world center of finance and trade and industry. It shows that there are, and it shows here, and I had this highlighted down here. There's a whole lot of things that shows here. But it shows in New York there's 130 hospitals. It shows there's 130 hospitals in that city. And large medical research centers. Now on page 132, it talks a little bit more about New York City being the capital of the world. It says, yet New York probably has the best claim to be called the capital of the world. As many people have said, New York has just about everything. And that's why that's why a lot of people will go there. They go there because they like to say, it has everything. Why is New York City a world center? Size alone entitles it to a place among the leading cities of the earth. And these are, the population statistics and stuff that were given here a little later. Remember when this book was written? This book was written back in the 70s. So imagine how these things have changed since that time. So, and it talks about here, but New York has other claims to leadership apart from its large size. Here you will find the United Nations, and this is where the leaders of the nations all gather to meet. And it says, what is further proof that New York is the prophetic city? What are her ports, her mountains, music of harpers and sorceries? How did the two Babylons use sorceries to undermine the society? And talking about going back and looking at the hospitals that were there, and the industries and things like that, everything that's there. As a commerce center, New York City is unsurpassed by any other city. There is not now, nor has there ever been, any other city like it. Its clothing and fashion center to buyer and seller who are required to visit New York in their business dealings. You hear about all of those things, those things and events on the news. The three parts, which is New York City, consist of Staten Island, Manhattan, and the Bronx. There's one other interesting thing here about this city of New York. There is a township in New York. See, there's New York right there. And this is on, I think it's, that Long Island, I think is what that is. I think this is considered Long Island. You got Long Beach down over here. Look what's circled there. See the name of that town? Whoop. You see the name of that town? Babylon. Babylon, New York. So, it's, not only does it live up to that prophetically as shown, but it's also it's actually identified by the very name of, there is Babylon in that city as well. So what we can do here is we'll stop on the top of page 134. We'll stop here on page 133, 134, bottom of page 133. We'll stop there. And we'll pick up here next week. So with that, men, may Yahweh be with you and bless you.